On the morning of the 28th of June 1914, a 19-year-old named Nedeljko Kabrinović threw a bomb at a car in Sarajevo. The car was carrying Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary. The bomb hit the folded back roof, bounced into the road, went off under the vehicle behind. Several people were hurt. Franz Ferdinand drove on unharmed. Kabrinović had a cyanide capsule and a river to jump into, and he used both. The cyanide was past his strength and only made him sick. The river was about 4 inches deep that summer. He was pulled out and arrested within minutes. So the plan to kill the Archduke had already gone wrong. Most of the assassins scattered. One of them, a teenager called Gavrilo Princip, gave up and walked off into the side streets. Franz Ferdinand was still dead by lunchtime, and the events that followed his death would, over the next 4 years, kill close to 9 million soldiers, bringing down 4 empires, and end the Europe that everyone alive had grown up inside. This is how that happened. I'm not going to walk through every battle. The part that matters is the 5 weeks in the middle of 1914, where a continent did not want a war argued its way into it. After the bombing, the Archduke went ahead with the official reception at the town hall. Then he decided he wanted to visit the people who had been wounded that morning. His staff agreed to drive him to the hospital, and they picked a route along the river that avoided the city center. Nobody told the lead driver. He took the original turn into Franz Joseph Street. The car carrying Franz Joseph turned to follow. An official inside realized the mistake and called out to go back. The driver braked. For a few seconds, the car sat still, top down in front of the delicatessen. Gavrilo Princip was standing on that corner. He had drifted there after the failed bombing. A few feet from where the motorcade now happened to stop, he stepped forward and fired twice. One shot hit Sophie, Franz Ferdinand's wife, in the stomach. The other hit the Archduke in the neck. Both were dead within the hour. You'll sometimes hear that Princip was eating a sandwich when this happened, that he'd given up, stopped for lunch, and looked up to find his targets in front of him. That part isn't true. The shop wasn't a sandwich shop, and nobody there recorded him eating. The coincidence was real enough. It just came from a wrong turn rather than a lunch break. A royal assassination was shocking. On its own though, it didn't have to mean war. Kings and dukes had been killed before. Europe had absorbed these shocks and moved on. The difference in 1914 was what Austria-Hungary decided to do with it. Austria-Hungary was an old, sprawling empire made of a dozen nationalities, most of whom didn't want to be ruled from Vienna. Serbia, just across the border, was a small, confident country that wanted to pull the empire's Slavs into a bigger Serbian state. The men running Austria-Hungary had wanted an excuse to deal with Serbia for years. The assassination gave them one. They had no interest in treating it as a crime to be solved. They saw an opening, and they set about using it to crush Serbia for good, quietly enough that the rest of Europe wouldn't step in to stop them. The catch was that Serbia had a powerful friend. Russia saw itself as a protector of the Slavic peoples, and an Austrian attack on Serbia would likely drag Russia in. So before doing anything, Austria-Hungary went to its own ally, Germany, and asked a direct question: if we move against Serbia and Russia comes in, will you stand with us? Germany said yes. The promise was open-ended and unconditional. Historians later called it the blank check. The Kaiser and his chancellor told Vienna to go ahead and deal with Serbia and to do it fast, while the rest of Europe still saw it as an emotional reaction to a murder. That promise shaped everything that followed. It meant Austria-Hungary no longer had to act carefully. It could be as aggressive as it liked, because the strongest army in Europe was standing behind it. On the 23rd of July, almost 4 weeks after the assassination, Austria-Hungary handed Serbia a list of demands. The ultimatum was written to be rejected. It asked Serbia to let Austrian officials run their own investigation on Serbian soil against Serbian citizens, the kind of thing no independent country could agree to and still call itself independent. Serbia was given 48 hours to accept all of it. Serbia's reply surprised everyone. It accepted almost every demand, softened its wording on the rest, and offered to take the remaining dispute to an international court. By the standards of 1914, it was close to total surrender. It didn't matter. Austria-Hungary had already decided that anything short of full acceptance counted as a no. On the 28th of July, 1 month to the day after the shooting in Sarajevo, it declared war on Serbia. Up to this point, the crisis was still about 2 countries and 1 corner of the Balkans. What turned it into a world war was the way the great powers had prepared for war in advance. Each of them had a mobilization plan. Detailed railway timetables for moving millions of men and their supplies to the front. These plans were rigid. Once you began, stopping or reversing them threw the whole system into chaos, and, the generals believed, left you exposed to an enemy who hadn't stopped. So mobilization worked like a row of switches wired together. Russia, to defend Serbia, began mobilizing against Austria-Hungary. Its planners said a partial mobilization wasn't really workable, so on the 30th of July, the Tsar ordered a full one against Germany as well. Germany's plan depended on speed. It assumed a war on 2 fronts, Russia in the east and France in the west, and it was built to knock France out fast before Russia's enormous army was ready. Russian mobilization started Germany's clock. On the 1st of August, Germany declared war on Russia. 2 days later, it declared war on France, Russia's ally, which was mobilizing too. To reach France quickly, Germany's plan went straight through Belgium, a neutral country. On the 4th of August, German troops crossed the Belgian border. Britain had stayed out of it so far. It had no firm treaty pulling it into a continental war. What it did have was an old agreement from 1813 guaranteeing Belgian neutrality. When Germany invaded Belgium, Britain demanded a withdrawal, got no answer, and declared war on Germany that same day. By the evening of the 4th of August, every major power in Europe was at war. 37 days had passed since Sarajevo. Almost everyone expected it to be short. The soldiers marching out in August 1914 had been told, and mostly believed they'd be home by Christmas. The last big war between European powers had been quick. Armies still thought in terms of bold advances and decisive battles. What they ran into was a kind of war nobody had planned for. Modern rifles, machine guns, and artillery made open ground deadly to cross. Within months, the armies on the Western Front had dug into trenches that ran more or less unbroken, from the Belgian coast to the Swiss border. For the next 3.5 years, that line barely moved, while millions of men died trying to push it a few miles one way or the other. The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas lasted until November 1918. By the time it stopped, the numbers had become hard to hold in your head. Around 9 million soldiers were dead, millions of civilians on top of that. Austria-Hungary lost roughly 9 in 10 of the men it put in uniform, killed, wounded, or captured. The thing that makes 1914 a genuine break in history isn't only the dead though, it's what came apart. 4 empires went into war and did not come out. The Russian Empire collapsed in 1917 into revolution, and what replaced it became the Soviet Union. The German Empire fell in 1918 and the Kaiser fled. Austria-Hungary broke into pieces and simply stopped existing. The Ottoman Empire, which has stood for 600 years, was carved up into the rough outline of the modern Middle East. The map people had been born into, the one with those 4 old monarchies sitting across Europe and the Near East, was gone. In its place came new countries: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Finland, the Baltic states, and the borders in the Middle East that the world is still arguing about. And because the peace that ended this war was harsh and left Germany humiliated and unstable, it planted a resentment that a man 20 years later would build a career upon. The war that was meant to end all wars set up the next one. So when people say the First World War started with a single assassination, that's true. It's also the least interesting part of the story. A bomb missed its target, a driver took a wrong turn, and a car stalled on exactly the wrong corner. What turned a street murder into the deaths of millions was a set of choices made calmly in offices over the following 5 weeks by men who each believed they were doing the reasonable thing, and most of whom expected to be home by Christmas. If you enjoyed that, please like, please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.